The light in the Concordance grand chamber was the color of preserved time. It flowed from the impossibly high, vaulted ceiling, not from any discernible source, but from the very material of the dome itself, a crystalline lattice that had witnessed the birth and death of stellar empires. It was a soft, gilded radiance that fell upon the floating daises of the assembled delegates, illuminating the myriad forms of the galaxy's sentient life. There were the Cathar, hulking and furred, their bodies tense with the grief of a dying star system. There were the shimmering, non-corporeal lumina, whose thoughts manifested as intricate patterns of light within their containment fields. And there was Vorlag, emissary of the Vex ascendancy, his multifaceted eyes unblinking, his chitinous form a study in rigid, contemptuous stillness. Silence, deep and resonant, held the chamber. It was a silence filled with the weight of an impending decision, a choice that could preserve a civilization or condemn it to oblivion. The Cathar had brought their plea here to the heart of galactic governance, their voices hoarse with desperation. Their outer colonies were falling, not to a rival power seeking territory, but to the Scourge, a nomadic, all-consuming swarm that stripped systems bare and left nothing but cold rock and silence in its wake. The Scourge did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They only devoured. The Cathar Armada, once a source of immense pride, had been shattered in a series of brutal, one-sided engagements. They were now begging for the Concordance to invoke its mutual defense pact, to commit the Grand Fleet to their border. But the Concordance hesitated. The Scourge was a threat of a magnitude not seen in millennia. Committing the Grand Fleet would leave other sectors vulnerable, and the Vex, ever the pragmatists, argued that the sacrifice of one member, however tragic, was a more logical outcome than the potential destabilization of the entire galactic core. Vorlag had just finished speaking, his voice a series of precise, clicking articulations that had methodically dismantled the Cathar's emotional appeal and replaced it with a cold calculus of acceptable losses. He had spoken of strategic buffers, of resource allocation, of the regrettable but necessary realities of galactic politics. He had almost won. Then the humans had made their offer. It was this offer that now hung in the air, a proposal so ludicrous, so offensively absurd, that it had stunned the chamber into this profound quiet. The humans were a new species, barely a few centuries on the galactic stage. They were small, soft-skinned mammals from a single, unremarkable system. They had joined the Concordance peacefully, had shared some minor medical and agricultural technologies, and had otherwise remained conspicuously silent in the grand debates. They were seen as provincial, earnest, and ultimately insignificant. And now, in the face of an existential threat that had broken the might of the Cathar and made the Vex Ascendancy Council retreat, humanity had offered a single ship. One ship. The silence was finally broken by the Cathar ambassador, Hesh, his great, shaggy head lifting slowly. His voice was a low rumble, thick with a sorrow that vibrated in the very air. We have lost fleets. Fleets comprised of vessels that have been the pinnacle of our engineering for 1,000 cycles. Our dreadnoughts, which can crack moons with their primary armaments, were swatted aside like insects. The Scourge swarm is a tide of oblivion, a force of nature. And our esteemed colleagues from Terra offer a single vessel. Is this a jest? Is our extinction a matter of such triviality that it warrants this insult? Vorlag's mandibles twitched, a Vex expression of grim satisfaction. He did not even deign to look at the human dais, where their ambassador, Elias Vance, sat perfectly still. The Cathar ambassador speaks with the tongue of grief, but his words carry the core of logic, Vorlag articulated, his voice resonating with condescending authority. The human proposal is not merely inadequate, it is a profound misunderstanding of the scale of this conflict. It is the gesture of a child offering a toy shield to a warrior facing a firestorm. It wastes our time. It cheapens the gravity of this moment. He turned his multifaceted gaze towards the Lumina Primus Xylos, whose form was a gentle, swirling nebula of gold and sapphire. The Lumina were the oldest, the wisest, the silent arbiters of the Concordance. Primus Xylos, surely you see this for what it is, a display of naivety. We must move on to a serious discussion of containment strategies for the Scourge after the Cathar systems have fallen. The light within Xylos' containment field pulsed, a slow, thoughtful rhythm like a cosmic heartbeat. His voice was not sound, but a direct telepathic impression, felt by all as a sense of ancient calm and profound perspective. Patience, emissary. Vorlag, the offer was made in earnest. It must be considered in earnest. To dismiss any potential solution out of prejudice is an indulgence we cannot afford. Vorlag's posture stiffened. He could not argue with the Lumina Primus directly, it was not done. But the rebuke was clear. Inside his cold, analytical mind, Vorlag seethed. These humans, they were an anomaly. Their biology was fragile, their lifespans laughably short. They possessed no obvious psionic abilities, no natural armor, no inherent mastery of exotic energies. Their technology, what little they had revealed, was efficient but unremarkable. They were a species defined by their limitations, and their refusal to acknowledge them was, to the Vex, a sign of a deep systemic irrationality. They communicated with sentimental art and illogical philosophies. They valued things like hope and sacrifice in ways that defied any coherent strategic modeling. And now their irrationality had reached its apex. One ship, it was an embarrassment. Finally, the human ambassador, Elias Vance, rose. He was a plain-looking man, his face unadorned by the intricate markings or biological indicators of status common to most other species. He wore a simple, dark uniform that absorbed the gilded light of the chamber, making him seem like a small patch of night against the splendor. When he spoke, his voice was calm, unamplified, yet it carried to every corner of the vast hall. "Primus Xylos, Emissary Vorlag, Ambassador Hesh, we understand your skepticism," Vance began, his gaze moving slowly from one delegate to another. "We have not been members of this concordance for long. We have not demonstrated our full capabilities. This is by design. We are a quiet people. We have learned, through a history far more violent than you can imagine, the terrible cost of ambition. We do not seek glory. We do not seek empire." He paused, letting the silence settle again. His demeanor was one of utter sincerity, a stark contrast to Vorlag's calculated rhetoric and Hesh's raw anguish. "The scourge represents a failure of life. It is a mindless consumption, an engine of entropy. It is the antithesis of everything the concordance stands for. We cannot stand by and watch it erase a member civilization. It is not in our nature." "And your nature dictates this farcical gesture?" Vorlag interjected, unable to restrain his contempt. Vance met the Vex's multifaceted gaze without flinching. "It dictates that we offer the most appropriate tool for the task. The vessel we have dispatched to the Cathar border is named the Vigilance. It is not a warship in the traditional sense. It carries no fleet, no squadrons of fighters, no legions of soldiers. It is a deterrent. We believe it will be sufficient." The word deterrent hung in the air, peculiar and specific. It was a diplomatic term, a word used in threats and postures, not in the face of an active, overwhelming invasion. To use it to describe a single ship against the scourge swarm was madness. Hesh the Cathar slumped in his dais, a great sigh of despair shuddering through his massive frame. The humans were not mocking them, they were simply insane. Their hope, which had been a guttering ember, was now extinguished. All that was left was the cold, pragmatic reality offered by the Vex. "The concordance must vote," Xylos' thought voice echoed, cutting through the tension. "The Cathar have petitioned for aid. 2 courses of action have been proposed. The Vex Ascendancy proposes a strategy of containment and non-intervention. The Terran Confederacy proposes the deployment of their vessel, the Vigilance, to act as a deterrent. As the Cathar system is the one at risk, their ambassador shall have the final say on which, if any, offer of aid they will accept." All eyes, all sensors, all psionic focuses turned to Hesh. The weight of his entire species was on him. One path was the cold certainty of abandonment, of being sacrificed for the greater good. The other was a fool's hope, an offer so divorced from reality that accepting it felt like a final, desperate descent into madness. He looked at Vorlag's rigid, unfeeling form. He looked at the swirling, enigmatic light of Xylos. Then he looked at Elias Vance, the human, whose expression was not one of pride or arrogance, but of a deep, solemn empathy. It was a look that seemed to understand his despair. In the logic of the Vex, there was no hope. There was only the calculation of doom. In the illogic of the humans, there was something he could not name, a flicker of an impossible chance. What was there left to lose? We accept the Terran offer," Hesh rumbled, his voice barely a whisper, yet it crashed through the chamber with the force of a thunderclap. "May the ancestors forgive me if I have just damned us all with false hope." Vorlag's entire body went rigid. The sheer, unadulterated stupidity of the decision was staggering. He made a sharp, cutting gesture of dismissal and Arnett his focus to the Vex Ascendancy's private channel, issuing a series of curt commands to his analysts. They were to monitor the Cathar border system with every sensor at their disposal. They would record the destruction of this lone human ship and the subsequent annihilation of the Cathar. They would compile the data and present it at the next session, a final, irrefutable argument for the supremacy of Vex logic and the folly of sentimental, primate-led decision-making. The humans had just given him the political capital to dominate concordance policy for the next 1,000 cycles. He almost felt a sliver of gratitude. An observation chamber adjacent to the Grand Hall was activated. A vast holographic display shimmered into existence, filling the center of the room. It showed a real-time feed from a network of long-range sensors focused on the beleaguered Cathar system of Othries. The delegates took their positions, their daises reconfiguring for observation. The air was thick with a funereal tension. They were here to witness the end of a world, and the final, embarrassing footnote of humanity's brief foray into galactic politics. The view was breathtaking and terrifying. The Scourge Armada was a sprawling, chaotic mass that blotted out the stars. It was not a fleet in any organized sense. It was a plague of ships, a tide of jagged metal and raw, pulsating energy signatures. There were vessels the size of moons, their surfaces pocked with weapon emplacements and gaping maws for stripping planetary crusts. Around them swarmed countless smaller ships, a frenzy of destroyers and corvettes that moved like locusts. They were advancing on Othries Prime, the last bastion of the Cathar in that system, its planetary shields glowing faintly, a fragile shell against the coming storm. And against this tide, there was a single point of light. The human ship, the Vigilance, had just translated from faster-than-light travel, positioning itself directly between the Scourge and the planet. On the holographic display, it was almost invisible, a mote of dust before a tidal wave. Tactical overlays flickered to life, projecting its specifications as best the concordance sensors could determine. The data was underwhelming. The ship was sleek, geometrically perfect, a long, featureless silver needle. It had no visible weapon ports, no external shield emitters, no fighter bays. Its energy signature was shockingly low, barely more than a civilian freighter. It was, by all metrics, a non-entity, a ghost. Vorlag allowed himself a dry, internal chuckle. It was even more pathetic than he had imagined. The Scourge ships did not even seem to register its presence. They did not alter their course. They did not slow. The swarm moved forward, inexorable, a force of physics as much as of malice. The Vigilance simply hung there, motionless, waiting. "They are not even attempting evasive maneuvers," one of Vorlag's aides subvocalized to him. "Their engines are cold. Are they surrendering?" "They are posturing," Vorlag clicked back. "A final, meaningless act of defiance. Observe and learn." Hesh watched, his great heart pounding in his chest. His people were on that planet, looking up at the sky, seeing this same horrific spectacle. They were seeing the swarm, and they were seeing the lone, tiny light that was their only and certainly final hope. He closed his eyes, unable to bear it. "Watch," the voice of Xylos whispered in his mind, gentle but firm. "History is made in such moments." The leading edge of the Scourge swarm, a vanguard of destroyers and heavy cruisers, came within firing range of the Vigilance. On the tactical display, projections showed their weapon systems charging, thousands of energy conduits reaching critical levels. The first volley would be enough to vaporize the human ship 100 times over. It was a foregone conclusion. The space around the Scourge vessels began to shimmer with raw power. And then nothing happened. Not nothing in the sense of an absence of action, but a more profound, more fundamental nothing. The space where the vanguard of the Scourge Armada had been was suddenly, impossibly, empty. There was no explosion, no light, no debris, no expanding cloud of plasma or radiation. One moment a dense formation of warships had been there, bristling with energy and intent. The next, they were simply gone. The stars that they had been obscuring were now clear and sharp. The vacuum was pristine. A collective shockwave of disbelief washed through the observation chamber. Hesh's eyes snapped open. Vorlag leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes widening as he instructed his sensors to magnify the area, to scan for any residual energy, any temporal anomaly, anything. The reports came back, layered with confusion and disbelief from the Vex sensor technicians. No energy discharge detected from the human vessel, no weapon signatures of any known or theoretical type, no radiation, no gravitational shear. The SC. Orcs ships had not been destroyed. They had ceased to exist. Their mass, their energy, their very presence had been deleted from the fabric of spacetime. The rest of the Scourge swarm, a vast and mindless entity, seemed to take a moment to process this. The forward momentum of the fleet faltered. Ships began to break formation, their movements becoming chaotic. They were a hive mind, and the part of the mind that had just touched the human ship had been excised with surgical, incomprehensible precision. Then the vigilance acted again. It did not move, it did not fire, but a ripple visible only as a faint distortion of the starlight behind it emanated from the ship. It was not an energy wave. It was something else, something far more fundamental. It looked as if space itself was folding, creasing for a microsecond. The ripple expanded outward, silent and serene. It washed over the first major wave of Scourge capital ships, the moon-sized behemoths, the carriers, the dreadnoughts. And like the vanguard, they vanished. An entire section of the Armada, the heart of its offensive power, was gone. Erased. The effect was so clean, so absolute, that the remaining smaller vessels now found themselves flying in a void where, moments before, their command ships had been. The swarm, decapitated and disoriented, fell into utter chaos. In the concordance chamber there was a sound. It was the sound of Ambassador Hesh, the stoic, grief-stricken Cathar, weeping, not with sorrow but with a dawning, terrifying, beautiful hope. He fell to his knees on his dais, his great head bowed, his sobs echoing in the stunned silence. Vorlag was frozen. His analytical mind, which could process quintillions of data points per second, was grinding to a halt. The input was impossible. It violated known physics. It was not warfare. It was not technology as the Vex understood it. It was something akin to divinity or a nightmare. He watched the holographic display as the Vigilance sent out another silent, serene ripple, and another. Each pulse erased a swath of the Scourge fleet. It was not a battle. It was a cleansing. The human ship was not fighting the swarm. It was editing it out of existence. Within minutes, a force that had shattered the Cathar military and threatened the stability of the entire galactic sector was gone. The entire Scourge Armada, save for a few terrified stragglers at the periphery that were now desperately trying to flee into hyperspace, had been annihilated. The space before Othries Prime was empty, quiet, and peaceful. The Vigilance remained, a single, silent silver needle against the backdrop of the stars. Then a communication channel opened, hailing the concordance directly. It was a standard audio transmission, unencrypted. The voice that came through was female, calm, and professional. There was no trace of triumph or exertion in her tone. "This is Captain Eva Rostova of the Terran vessel Vigilance. We are transmitting on all concordance frequencies. The entity designated the Scourge has been neutralized in this system. The immediate threat to Othries Prime is over. We are providing the Cathar government with a full sensor log of the engagement. The Vigilance will maintain its position to ensure no stragglers return. Rostova out." The transmission ended. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence born not of tension, but of sheer, unadulterated awe and a deep, primal fear. Humanity had not sent a ship. They had sent a miracle, or a god, or a monster. No one in the chamber knew which, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Vorlag stared at the image of the lone, quiet ship, and for the first time in his long, logical life, he felt the cold, irrational touch of dread. He had not merely miscalculated the strength of a junior species. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of reality itself. The Grand Chamber was reconvened, but the atmosphere had undergone a profound transmutation. The gilded light that had once seemed a symbol of majestic order now felt fragile, like the last glow of a dying candle in a room suddenly filled with an unknown presence. The delegates returned to their daises, their movements slow, deliberate. The casual arrogance of the Vex was gone, replaced by a rigid, watchful caution. The despair of the Cathar had been replaced by a reverent, trembling awe. All eyes, all thoughts were on the human dais, where Elias Vance once again stood. He looked no different. He was the same small, unassuming figure in a simple, dark uniform. But now he seemed to cast a shadow that stretched across the entire chamber, across the whole of the concordance. It was Vorlag who spoke first, his voice stripped of its usual condescending resonance. The clicking articulations were softer now, more hesitant. "Ambassador Vance, on behalf of the Vex Ascendancy, we have witnessed the defense of Othries. The term deterrent was an efficient descriptor for what we observed." He paused, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the human. "We require an explanation. What was that vessel? What was that weapon?" The question was direct, a demand born of fear. The Vex lived by a creed of knowledge and control. What they had just seen was a force beyond their comprehension, and therefore beyond their control. It was an intolerable state of being. Elias Vance's expression was somber. He had expected this. He nodded slowly. It is not a weapon, emissary, not in the way you understand it. To call it a weapon is like calling a star a campfire. The term is correct in essence, but it fails to capture the scale and the nature of the thing. He took a slow breath, his gaze sweeping across the silent chamber. The vigilance is a reality engine. It does not project energy or matter. It projects a localized, alternate set of physical laws. The ripples you saw were waves of consensual reality, overriding the baseline physics of the space they passed through. To the ships of the Scourge, the strong nuclear force momentarily ceased to bind their atoms. Their own fusion reactors instantly violated the laws of thermodynamics, and the very geometry of spacetime around their hulls became fatally inconsistent with their existence. They were not blown apart. They were paradoxed. They were unwritten from the universe because, for a fraction of a second, the universe in their immediate vicinity no longer had the rules required for them to exist. A wave of conceptual shock passed through the delegates. Even the Lumina's light flickered, a sign of deep contemplation. This was not advanced engineering. This was the technology of creation, the ability to edit the source code of the cosmos. Vorlag struggled to process the information. You can rewrite physics at will? The question was a bare whisper. A power like that, you could erase suns, you could unmake worlds, you could dismantle our fleets, our homeworlds, the ascendancy itself, with a single thought. We could, Vance replied, his voice soft but firm, carrying an immense weight of sorrow. And that is why you have never seen this technology before today, and why you will likely never see it again. He looked at the assembled species, his eyes filled with a profound and ancient weariness that seemed at odds with his species' youthful presence in the galaxy. My people, humanity, are not like you, emissary. The Vex evolved on a world of perfect logic and scarce resources, the Cathar on a world of communal hardship and fierce loyalty. The Lumina, your origin, is beyond our understanding. But we humans, we evolved on a world of chaotic abundance and endless conflict. Our greatest enemy, throughout our entire history, has never been a predator or a famine or a dying star. It has always been ourselves. His words painted a picture that the other species had only glimpsed in sanitized historical archives. A history of brutal, savage, internecine warfare. A relentless drive for self-annihilation that had nearly succeeded on multiple occasions. We weaponized the atom and nearly burned our world to cinders. We engineered plagues and nearly wiped our own species from existence. We clawed our way to the stars not with a unified purpose, but as warring tribes seeking higher ground from which to destroy each other. Our own brilliance has always been our most terrifying poison. The technology and the vigilance, he continued, was not born from a desire to conquer the stars. It was born from the terror of our own nature. We reached a point in our development where our conventional weapons became so powerful that their use would guarantee our own extinction. We needed a final failsafe, an ultimate guarantee that war was no longer possible. We did not create a greater sword. We created the idea that could unmake all swords. The delegates listened, transfixed. This was not a boast. It was a confession. A story of a species that had looked into the abyss of its own soul and had been forced to invent godhood just to keep from falling in. The Vigilance and its sister ships are not crewed by warriors. They are crewed by philosophers, by poets, by mathematicians. Their captains are chosen for their empathy, for their profound understanding of the sanctity of life. Captain Rostova's message to you was not a cold, professional report. It was a statement of our philosophy. The threat was removed, efficiently and completely, because that was the most merciful way to do it. A prolonged battle would have caused more suffering. But make no mistake, the act of erasing trillions of sentient, albeit hostile, lives is a burden that she and her crew will carry forever. We do not celebrate this power. We bear it like a crown of thorns. He let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of his revelation to sink in. We keep this power hidden because power itself is a corrupting force. If the galaxy knew we possessed it, some would fear us, others would challenge us. Alliances would shift, an arms race for a weapon that cannot be countered would begin. The galactic balance would be shattered and we would become the very thing we despise, a source of instability and fear. We joined the Concordance to learn from you, to find partners in peace, to help us ensure we never have to use the Vigilance again. We do not want to be your masters. We do not want to be your judges. We simply wish to be your equals. The humility of the statement, coming from a species that held the power to unmake reality, was staggering. It was a complete inversion of everything the Vex, and many of the other elder races, believed about the nature of power. Power was meant to be used to secure, to dominate, to ensure survival. To the humans, power was a poison to be contained, a burden to be shouldered with reluctance and sorrow. Hesh, the Cathar ambassador, rose slowly to his feet, his massive form radiating a gratitude so profound it was almost a physical force. On behalf of the Cathar people of every soul on Othri's prime, he struggled for words. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You have shown us that true strength is not the power to destroy, but the wisdom not to. You have not just saved our lives, you have saved our faith in the universe. Vorlag stood motionless for a long moment. His entire worldview, the logical foundation of the Vex ascendancy, had been fractured. He had seen humanity as weak, sentimental, and irrational. He now saw that their sentiment was a shield, their irrationality a form of higher wisdom. They were not children playing with adult tools. They were adults who remembered with visceral horror what it was like to be a child playing with fire. Finally, he inclined his head in a gesture of Vex respect, a motion so rare in the Grand Chamber that it sent another ripple of shock through the delegates. Ambassador Vance, the Vex ascendancy was wrong. Your logic is deeper than our own. We have much to learn from your species. We would be honored to consider humanity not just an equal, but a guiding partner in the future of this concordance. It was a total capitulation, an offering of alliance from a position of newfound, humbled respect. A new era for the galaxy was dawning, forged not in the fire of a great war, but in the silent, awesome demonstration of a power too terrible to use, wielded by a people who understood its cost. The threat of the scourge had been a test, and humanity had passed it in a way no one could have predicted. They had not won a war. They had transcended the very concept of it. Just as a sense of profound and historic unity began to settle over the chamber, a chime echoed, a high-priority alert. A junior lumina, a swirl of anxious silver light, manifested beside Primus Xylos's dais. It communicated directly with its leader, a frantic cascade of light patterns. Xylos's own serene nebula of gold and sapphire seemed to tighten, to grow more intense. He turned his attention back to the chamber, and his thought voice, for the first time in anyone's memory, carried a trace of something other than placid calm. It carried a note of profound, ancient astonishment. Ambassador Vance, Xylos projected, his voice now resonating with an urgency that seized everyone's attention. Our long-range resonance sensors have just finished analyzing the energy signature from your vessel's operation. The reality-altering cascade it produced was unique, an event without precedent in the recorded history of the galaxy. We are aware, Primus, Vance said, a hint of concern in his own voice. The event was meant to be localized. The after-effects should have been negligible. The local effects were, Xylos confirmed, but the cascade itself, it did not simply dissipate, it propagated. It traveled outward not through space but through the quantum substrate that underlies spacetime itself. It was not an echo. It was a signal. And a moment ago, from the absolute void between our galaxy and the next, something answered. A new image appeared on the holographic display, replacing the serene view of the Othri system. It was a complex waveform, a cascade of data that was elegant, structured, and undeniably artificial. It was a signal of immense complexity and power, broadcast from a source point so distant and so empty that it should not exist. Vorlag's analysts were already working, their calculations flashing across the display. Origin, the Boötes void. Age of signal, indeterminate but based on redshift and decay, a minimum of 2 billion years. It had been a repeating, dormant broadcast, a single, impossibly ancient question sent out over and over again for eons. But now it had changed. The old signal had stopped, and a new one had begun. What is it saying? Hesh rumbled, his newfound hope now tinged with a new, cosmic apprehension. The original broadcast was a query, Xylos explained, his light pulsing with an almost N. Irvis energy, a mathematical sequence, a key waiting for a lock. It was a question asking in the universal language of physics, is anyone there who can understand this? To understand the question, a civilization would have to be able to manipulate spacetime at a fundamental level. For billions of years, the question has gone unanswered. The Lumina Primus paused, letting the implication wash over them. The energy signature from the Vigilance was the answer. It was the key fitting the lock, and the new signal, it is no longer a question. Elias Vance stepped closer to the holographic display, his face pale, his eyes wide as he stared at the flowing alien data. He and Xylos, the representative of the galaxy's youngest great power and its oldest, looked upon the message from the void together. It is an invitation. Xylos's voice filled the silent chamber, now laced with a sense of awe so profound it bordered on terror. It says, "Finally, we see you. It is time to begin." The Grand Chamber was silent once more. The scourge, the politics of the concordance, the very concept of galactic power, all of it suddenly seemed impossibly small, provincial, like the squabbles of children in a sandbox. Humanity, in its desperate, ethical bid to end war, had rung a doorbell that had been silent since before their sun had even formed. They had revealed themselves not just to the galaxy, but to whatever lay waiting in the great, patient darkness beyond. The ship no one saw coming had just put the entire galaxy on a stage it never knew existed, for an audience that had been waiting for a very, very long time. The future had arrived, and it was infinitely larger and more terrifying than anyone had ever dared to imagine.